Right, yes. So in the previous yes, so as I've in the previous session, we just started with the American Revolution and we saw a few important causes. So let's proceed with it. I'll give the gist of the topic that we covered in the previous session. Kindly mute everyone. It would be great if you guys will mute. If you have any issues, you can later on message me, or in between you can unmute and question. But yeah, all right, yeah. So two important questions we had seen, like 2013 ka question and 2019 ka question. 2013 American Revolution was an economic revolt against mercantilism, and 2019 explain how foundation of modern world was laid by American Revolution. So these were the two questions which have come in the past 10 years or the previous years from this particular topic. Okay, so we had seen the importance of this revolution. Now, why American Revolution is considered to be extremely important revolution? Because it was the first organized political revolution in the history of the world where people asserted that they have right to rule themselves. Okay, and this particular revolution gave birth to United States of America as a nation. Second thing, it ended the autocratic rule that was prevalent in America. And third thing, this particular revolution gave birth to the democratic form of government in America, and that became a focal point that resulted into different revolutions that took place in the another countries of the world, and that we'll see in the concluding part. Okay, then we saw how this colonization process of America started. So we had seen that very moment the American continent was discovered, we saw that Christopher Columbus accidentally landed on America and he thought that it's India. So he named the natives of America as Red Indians. But then he was preceded by Amerigo. So as Amerigo came to this continent, he said that this is not India. This is altogether a new land that has been discovered. And he named the country as America. So America is named after Amerigo. As soon as America was discovered, Europeans started colonizing it. So Spanish people came, English came, French came, and everyone started establishing their colonies into this newly discovered land, newly discovered continent. Now we are mainly discussing about the British colonies. So Britain had established its 13 colonies on the east coast of America, that is the Atlantic coast of America. So you can see over here the names of the different colonies: Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Hampshire, Massachusetts, New York. All these were the 13 British colonies established on the east coast of America. And who were these people of the colonies? So those people in Britain who were suffering, like for example, the ones who were landless peasants, people seeking religious freedom, traders, those who wanted to explore new things, they all came and they settled in these 13 colonies. So when I say American Revolution, so American Revolution is the revolution of the people who settled in these 13 colonies with their mother country, Great Britain. These 13 colonies, now they wanted the freedom from the mother country, Great Britain, and they wanted to be recognized as Americans and not as original Britishers. So that is all about American Revolution. That is the introductory part about this revolution. Then we saw the different causes that resulted into this revolution. So first cause which we saw, that was a political cause. Now each colony had a political setup. So each colony was ruled by a governor. Like in India also, similar setup was there. British had colonies in Madras, Bombay, Bengal. So each colony was ruled by a governor. On the similar lines, in America also, each colony was ruled by a governor, and this governor was appointed by the British Crown. Okay, and then each and every colony had its parliament, legislative wing and executive wing. And in this legislative and executive wing, they had colonial representation. That is, the people of colonies were elected to this legislative and executive framework headed by governor who was appointed by the British Crown. But the issue was that in the initial phase, the relation was very much cordial. But slowly and gradually, we will see that governors started empowering, or the British crown started imposing different laws and all, and they started dominating these colonies. And people did not like this setup. Now they wanted their home rule. Now they wanted their self-rule. They were not happy being ruled by a governor who was a representative of British crown. They wanted that they should be governed by the person who is elected by them, who is their real representative, and not the one who is appointed by the crown. So slowly and gradually, we'll see that the people of the colonies demanded for self-rule. Okay, so that was the first cause which we covered in the previous session. Second thing, we saw social cause. The social cause was that now these people, those who came in America, established their colonies, now they had to start everything from scratch, because America was completely a newly discovered continent. So they had to start everything from zero. Unko unka pura industrial setup karna tha, agricultural setup, everything they started. And these people were very much hardworking. They built up American society, and they were the one who contributed to modern, westernized, liberal American culture. On the other hand, British society remained quite conservative. So now there was an ideological conflict between the conservative British society and modern and civilized, liberalized American society. Okay, so that was the second cause which we saw. We saw even this. Now, what comprised American society? So the Native Americans were called as Red Indians. Then we saw slaves being sold into American society, African slaves. And then we saw the Americans, that is the Europeans who came to America and who started recognizing themselves as Americans. Okay, no longer they wanted to be recognized as Europeans, they wanted to be recognized as Americans. Fine. Then we saw cultural development, that is a role played by different thinkers of the time. These thinkers inspired Americans. Okay, so we have studied about Thomas Jefferson, John Locke, Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin. So these were the important scholars who inspired Americans to revolt. And the most important thing which we studied, that is economic causes. So the first question which we saw, American Revolution was a revolt against mercantilism. So that directly hits this cause, that is economic cause, right? So we had seen different economic acts introduced by British. Navigation Act, Navigation Act, that is the people of the colonies could use only British ships. They were not allowed to use non-British ships. Then Enumerated Commodities Act, certain commodities could be exported only to England. Staple Act, heavy duties were imposed on import of goods in colonies from any other place, so that they could only buy the goods from Britain only. Iron Act, Woolen Act. So those industries which were well established in Britain, colonists were not allowed to start these industries. It means that if they wanted iron works, if they wanted woolen textile, they have to import only from Britain. So all these policies in a way supported and promoted British economy. Okay, so similarly, jaise India mein hua, the same example, India was colonized, India was used as a colony, India was used as a source of raw material and a market for the British products. Same thing they applied in America. America was used as a source of raw materials that were required in British factories, and British finished products were sold in America. So jaise India mein hua colonization, the way India was used as a colony by Great Britain, on the similar lines, America was used as a colony by Great Britain. Then we saw Albani Congress. So by 1750s, Americans realized that the main issue, the main cause of their sorrow was England. And as a result, representatives of 7 colonies met at Albany, which is called as Albani Congress. And in this particular Albani Congress, later on, Benjamin Franklin, he in a magazine, he published an article with the image of a snake. So we are seeing over here this image of the snake cut into different parts. So he wanted to say to the people of the colonies, join, be united against the British rule, or be ready to die. If you will not be united against the British rule, British will divide us and rule us the way they did in India. So Benjamin Franklin warned the people of the colonies, but at that time, people of colonies, they said that we won't be joining this Congress at that stage. Can anyone tell me why people of colonies declined to join this Congress? I had given a reason in the previous session. Kisi ko yaad hai? What was the issue? Why they said that we won't be joining the Congress? Yes? Any idea why they said that we won't be joining the Congress? All right, fine. The main issue why they were not ready at that time to join the Congress was that French problem, right? Do you remember? Even French had their colonies in Great Britain. Even French had their colonies in America. And I told that French and Britain, French and English, they were traditional enemies of each other. They were constantly in conflict with each other. And French का जो king था, France का जो king था, Louis XVI, he had taken a vow that he will be annexing all the British colonies which were there in North America. So remember that in world history, whenever you are studying, French and English, they were traditional enemies of each other. Their animosity was also extended to India. When you will be studying modern history, modern India, you will be studying about the Carnatic wars between France and England. They extended even to India. So they were enemies of each other, competitors of each other. So French also had colonies in North America, and they were in conflict with Britain. And then 7 years war were going on between Britain and France from 1756 to 63. And as a result, during this war, French King Louis XVI, he said that he will be annexing all the British colonies in America. So now the colonies were in a state of confusion. If we will go against Britain, what will happen? French people would be strengthened, and if we will get freedom from Britain, we will be under now French. So it's better that now, as of now, let us support Britain so that the French problem will be tackled, and then we will see what to do with the British entities. So by 1763, this 7 years war came to an end. French were defeated and the French problem was resolved. So now colonies, after 1763, they were free. Now only one enemy was there, Great Britain. So now they decided, now we'll focus on Great Britain. We had seen that there was a change in policy of Great Britain. Okay, so before 1760, that is before this 7 years war or before this French issue, though colonies were ruled by Great Britain, but the laws that were introduced, we saw that so many laws were introduced. The laws were loosely executed. The laws were not executed in a strict manner. Even though Americans breached those laws, they were not held responsible or they were not punished. But after 1763, the control of British over these colonies became more and more stringent. And especially after the 7 years war, British attitude was that we have protected the colonies from the French problem, and as a result, colonies are liable to pay for the war expenses. तो उन्होंने बोला हमने आपको बचाया है French के issue से. Okay, from the clutches of French, we have protected you. So now you are going to pay us for the entire expenses of the war. Okay. So after 1763, we'll see that British ka control over these colonies becomes more and more stringent, and they started imposing many acts. So after 1763, the acts were, and now these acts were very strictly executed. If the acts were not followed, Americans were punished. So 1763, the first act was Crown's Proclamation. This is not exactly an act, it's a proclamation, a declaration given by the British Crown. The declaration was that Americans were not permitted to cross Appalachian Mountains, and they could not go west of it. Okay, now if you see the Appalachian, to the west of Appalachian Mountain and all, it was a mineral rich area, so they didn't want Americans to cross that area and get access to resources. Probably British themselves wanted to come and utilize the resources, so they made a proclamation that Americans cannot cross the Appalachian Mountains and they cannot settle to the west of Appalachian Mountains. That was the first proclamation. So in a way, they are trying to put restriction on the movement of the colonist. Second is 1764, Passing of Currency Act. Now, in order to strengthen British pound in the world, they declared that Americans cannot use their own currency. Americans have to use only and only British pound as their official currency. So that was the second act. Third act was that Act of 1764, Sugar Act. Now, what is this Sugar Act? Americans were, so sugar was in great demand in England. So Americans were compelled that you will be exporting all your sugar only and only to England. So whatever raw material, whatever things that were required in England, okay, they used to ensure that that are getting fulfilled from America, and they were compelled to export only to England. It means that the cost will, so they will not have any option. They have to sell it to England only on the prices that are predetermined by England. So cost ke upar bhi, like price ke upar bhi, there is a restriction. Then 1764 ka Quartering Act. Now what is the Quartering Act? So British soldiers, they were deployed in America to safeguard the colonies. So Americans were now made to pay for the entire expenses of British soldiers, those who were posted in America. Okay. Then in 1765, Stamp Act was introduced. Now you know that for legal transaction we need a stamp paper. So stamp paper हम जो खरीदते हैं, we pay for the stamp paper. So that cost goes to government, state government. Okay, so Stamp Act was introduced. इन्होंने बोला now for all the business transactions, for each and every single transaction, you have to use stamp paper. So it means that if for any transaction, if you have to use the stamp paper, uska tax will go to the British government. So all these acts were introduced after 1763. Okay, the first is Crown's proclamation that Americans can't cross Appalachian Mountains. Second, they have to use only British pound as their currency. Third, sugar could be only exported to England. Fourth, Quartering Act, that is Americans had to pay for the British soldiers' expenses. And fifth one, Stamp Act, that is for all the transactions they have to use stamp paper only. Okay, after this, now people of the colonies, they revolted, okay, against all these developments that had happened, and now slowly and gradually they start, and because of which they said that we are not going to follow, we are not going to abide by these laws, and that resulted into drop of the British revenue. Since the colonies were not following the laws, there was a decline in the British revenue. Now the colonists, they gave a famous statement, no taxation without representation. So they understood that English Parliament, that is British Parliament, it didn't had a single representative from the colony. So colony ka not a single person was appointed in the British Parliament. And on that, so if there is no representation, if our viewpoints are not kept in the British Parliament, then why do you want us to pay for the taxes? So they said that if we do not have our representatives, then you have no right to levy any tax on us. So if you want taxes, you should allow us to be represented. So the slogan that was adopted was no taxation without representation. Okay. So after this, a new development took place in 1766. New British Prime Minister, he said that we will be repealing the Stamp Act. So just to pacify the people of the colonies, Stamp Act was cancelled. The Stamp Act was repealed. But there was no use, because even though they repealed the Stamp Act in the very same year, so on one hand they tried to pacify the people of the colonies, but on the other hand they passed a declaratory act. So in 1766, a declaratory act was passed. According to the declaratory act, they made a firm declaration that the British Parliament, that is English Parliament, had all the rights to make laws for the colonies. So always the attitude was that the colonies, we have established all these colonies, so it is our right to rule over these colonies, and it is our right to enforce laws on the people of the colonies. So in 1766, the Declaratory Act was passed, and according to the Declaratory Act, English Parliament said that they had all the rights to make the laws for the people of the colonies. So on one hand, they repealed the Stamp Act, tried to pacify the people of the colonies, but on the other hand, once again, it resulted into resentment. Then in 1767, Townshend Act was passed. According to this Townshend Act, taxes were imposed on essential commodities, like the basic commodities like glass, paper, and tea were taxed. So similar things you can identify with the Indian freedom struggle. So taxes were imposed on the essential commodity like salt, and we saw the outcome of that was a Dandi March. Okay, so on the similar lines in America, we saw that the taxes being imposed on the essential commodities like glass, paper, and tea, and Americans protested against this Townshend Act. And this protest was conducted at Boston. So Boston was a very famous harbor in America. So Americans went and they protested on 5th of March 1770 at that Boston, and this resulted into firing by the British soldiers. So British soldiers who were present in that Boston, they started open firing on the people, those who are gathered over there, and this resulted into death of 3 Americans. Okay, and the crowd of 300 to 400 were there, and out of that 300 to 400, 3 people died, and which is regarded as a Boston Massacre of 5th March 1770. So this is a very famous incident, Boston Massacre, and that was a trigger point. Okay, that British soldiers, they had nothing to do with the life of the Americans. The life of the Americans is not at all a valued thing, because just we are protesting. So on behalf of protests, you are simply killing us. Okay, so we see that ki imagine karo, ye to khud Britishers hi the, like British soldiers killing Britishers. Americans are basically Britishers, right? By birth, by origin, they are Britishers. So in India, General Dyer did Jallianwala Bagh, so wo to hum Indians the. So they not even spared their own blood. Americans, originally by birth and by blood, they are one and the same only. So in 1773, now Lord North, he was the new British Prime Minister. Once again, he decided that people are very much angry by our behavior, that is the Boston Massacre. So once again, we need to pacify the colonists. And once again, he adopted the conciliatory approach. That is, he decided we are going to repeal all the earlier acts. But now, once again, there was no use, because jo ek cheez karte the, but dusra cheez, it used to go 360-degree wrong. That is, on one hand, he adopted a conciliatory approach and he repealed all the previous acts. But on the other hand, he introduced Tea Act of 1773, and this was a final spark. Now, what is this Tea Act of 1773? East India Company jo tha, East India Company was facing a huge financial crunch, and East India Company ke paas 18 million pounds worth unsold tea packets were lying. So 18 million pound ke unsold tea packets were there with the East India Company, and karne ka kya itne tea ke packets ke, and they were facing that financial issue. So now the Tea Act was introduced in 1773. According to this Tea Act, it was ordered that all these tea crates would be brought and directly shipped to the colonies, and colonies had to buy this tea only and only from the East India Company only. So that was the Tea Act of 1773. So as soon as this act was introduced, people of the colonies, they said that we are not going to accept this tea packets. We don't want to buy any tea from you people, and we are not going to allow the tea packets to be loaded into to be unloaded into America. But at that time, Boston ka Massachusetts jo tha, so Boston was a harbor in Massachusetts. So governor of Massachusetts was Hutchinson. So Hutchinson ne promise kiya British Crown ko कि आने दो ships को, let the ships be brought, I will ensure that the ships are unloaded. मैं देखता हूँ कि कौन कैसे ये ships रोकता है, I will ensure that ये सारे tea के packets अमेरिका में आएंगे. Okay, so this assurance was given by whom? It was given by Hutchinson. He was the governor of Massachusetts. He promised the British Crown that don't worry, send all these troops, I will ensure that these troops, these tea packets are being sold into America. At the very same time, Samuel Adams, okay, so Samuel Adams, a person from colonies, he organized a group of citizens, and these people disguised as red Indians, okay, American Indians, and they boarded the ship. So चुपके से वो ship पे गए उन लोग, they disguised as Native Americans, boarded on the ships, and they dumped all these crates of tea into water, into that Boston harbor, and that Boston harbor, that water was completely filled with the tea powder. And this famous incident is regarded as Boston Tea Party. Okay, so any doubt up till now? Any issues? Whatever we have covered acts till Stamp Act we have seen. Then we had seen the different developments that took place. Boston Massacre we saw how Americans protested and how British soldiers open fired on them, and Americans, 3 Americans died in that. So that was Boston Massacre. And then the Boston Tea Party, how the Tea Act was imposed on the colonists and how they tackled this entire incidents. So that is Boston Tea Party. Okay. Any doubt up till now? Any issues? Is everything clear?
मैम बॉस्टन टी पार्टी को एक बार शॉर्ट में फिर से बता दीजिए शॉर्ट में.
Boston Tea Party. All right, fine. So British Parliament had passed an act, Tea Act. So what was the issue? East India Company के पास 18 million pounds of tea थे, अनसोल्ड टी के पैकेट्स थे. अब वो करेंगे क्या इतने सारे टी के पैकेट्स के? तो उन्होंने बोला, इन्होंने एक्ट पास किया कि ऑल दिस टी पैकेट्स वी आर सेंडिंग टू अमेरिका. अमेरिका को खरीदना पड़ेगा हमसे ही टी. You cannot buy tea from anyone else. You have to buy the tea from us only. We are sending the tea packets. You have to buy the tea. So जो गवर्नर था मैसेच्यूसेट्स का, मैसेच्यूसेट्स was one of the colony. उसका जो गवर्नर था हचिनसन, उसने बोला ब्रिटिश क्राउन को, प्रॉमिस किया कि आप भेज दो शिप्स, आप भेज दो, मैं देखता हूं कि कौन कैसे रोकता हूं. आई विल एंश्योर दैट कि द शिप इज अनलोडेड इन अमेरिका. वो टी के पैकेट्स अमेरिका में आते हैं. एंड सो ये बॉस्टन में जैसे ये टी के शिप्स आते हैं, तो सैमुअल एडम्स वाज द लीडर. उन्होंने अमेरिकन को एक ग्रुप बनाया, 4-5 अमेरिकन को साथ में लिया एंड उनको रेड इंडियंस की तरह डिस्गाइज किया. डिस्गाइज मतलब उनका जो कलर वगैरह, दे एक्टेड दैट वोर द क्लोथ्स ऑफ रेड इंडियंस एंड दे बोर्डेड ऑन द शिप. एंड धीरे, काफी सारे थे, 5-6 नहीं थे, ग्रुप ऑफ रेड इंडियंस, अमेरिकन डिस्गाइज्ड एंड ड्रेस्ड एज रेड इंडियंस. दे बोर्डेड द शिप एंड शिप पे जाके उन्होंने जितने भी टी के जो थ्रेड्स थे, पैकेट्स थे, उन्होंने पानी में डाल दिए बॉस्टन के हार्बर में. And that is known as Boston Tea Party. Clear with this, Aarti?
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. Now, what was Britain's reaction? So, for Britain, it was intolerable. That is, how can you do this? So, immediately in 1774, British government passed Intolerable Act. Okay. So, passing of Intolerable Act. So, the points of this act were: no political meetings would be conducted in the colonies. So colonies were prohibited from conducting any political meeting. Closing of Boston port. तो Boston का जो harbor था, port था, उसको बंद कर दिया गया. Next on agenda was arresting of the culprits. So those who were responsible for this act would be arrested. And the last was compensation for tea. तो जितना भी नुकसान हुआ है tea के samples पानी में डालने के वजह से, उसका पूरा compensation will be taken from the people of the colonies. Okay, so passing of Intolerable Act, no political meeting, closing of Boston port, arresting of the culprits, and compensation for the losses. Now, after this, Americans, now when they saw the passing of this act, now even they thought that now we need to form our own union, we need to form our own Congress. So first Continental Congress was held. Okay, so first Continental Congress, that is the first session of Continental Congress, was convened at Philadelphia in 1774. So this was a meeting of the representatives from the colonies. So 54 delegates, 54 representatives from the colonies, they came, they met at Philadelphia, which is called as the first session of the Continental Congress in 1774. And here they drafted Declaration of Rights and Grievances. उन्होंने बोला कि what are our rights and what are our issues, what are our grievances. उसका उन्होंने एक document बनाया and they elected Peter Randolph as the first president of this Continental Congress. Okay, so Continental Congress was organized in 1774. 56 delegates, that is representatives from the colonies, they met at this Continental Congress, drafted a document called as Declaration of Rights and Grievances, and they unanimously elected Peter Randolph as the very first president of this Continental Congress. The other important delegates of the Continental Congress were Patrick Henry, George Washington, John Adams, John Jay. These are other important personalities, those who attended this Continental Congress. So that was the first Continental Congress. Now, Continental Congress, what what did it do and what was its agenda? So from 1774 जब से ये बना गया till 1789 जब तक अमेरिका को इंडिपेंडेंस मिलता है, तब तक this Continental Congress, it functioned as government for 13 American colonies. Okay, now what was the purpose of conducting this Congress? So there was two important things on agenda. First thing, they wanted to establish the fact that the central government, that is the British government, was degenerating into an unrestrained tyranny. That is, they wanted to prove that the British government is becoming day by day despotic and autocratic. Okay, so the way they started, so that is after 150 years, the authorities of Great Britain had started to violate the rights of the Englishmen in the colony. So they said that कि 150 साल हो गए हमें यहाँ पे settle होने होके. So now these people of Great Britain, they have started encroaching, they have started violating the rights of the Englishmen who are settling, who have settled or who are there in these colonies. So they wanted to tell to the British government कि earlier when you started your rule, that was fine, but slowly and gradually you are becoming more and more despotic and autocratic and trying to control the people of the colonies. So that was the first thing. Second thing, these representatives, they wanted to discuss and they wanted to bring out some meaningful steps to free the people of the 13 British colonies. Okay, but they wanted all this should happen within the framework of law. Okay, so like they basically whatever they wanted to do, they wanted to do within the framework of law. They wanted that they were very clear in their approach that we want to remedy the situation, whatever is there, we want to rectify whatever issues are going on, and we wanted to end the government's use of arbitrary power and oppression. But please remember, at this stage, they were not of any opinion of seeking complete freedom from Great Britain. So imagine, compare this with the moderate phase of Indian national movement. What was the opinion of moderates at the earlier phase? They wanted, they were loyal with the British rule, and they wanted that the British rule should exist in India so that India would civilize, India, the democratic form of government would be introduced in India. They were not in opinion, they were not in favor of complete independence, because according to the moderates at that time, the situation was not favorable for India to get the freedom. On the similar lines, at this period, the first Continental Congress, even they had this very thing on their agenda. That is, first they wanted to convince the British authorities, whatever you are doing, that is not in favor of Englishmen who are staying in these colonies. And second thing, they wanted to discuss among themselves and they wanted to bring out a solution. But remember, they wanted to work within the constitutional framework. Similarly, even moderates in India, whatever work they were doing within the constitutional framework. Okay, so the assembly in this Philadelphia, it intended to determine what non-violent legal action the delegates would recommend to bring the central government back under the law. So they wanted the central government, British rule, to continue, but they wanted that they should understand what is the issue, what is their mistake, and then they should rule us, but again in a proper manner as they were doing earlier. Fine. So is this point clear? There can be a question, compare American phase with the moderate phase of India. So in this way, you need to compare what was the strategy. It was very much identical, which India followed later on during the moderate phase. Okay, rather we can say that maybe moderates were inspired from the American strategy, and so they also wanted to work within the constitutional framework. Any doubt in this? Any issues? Aarti, is it clear? All right.
Yes,
All right, fine. So now what was the Britain's reaction? So you are seeing that the people of colonies, they wanted British rule, they wanted to work within the framework of law, but yet what was the Britain's reaction? Instead of pacifying the situation, instead of negotiating with the people of colonies, what was the British reaction? In 1775, Britain sent its troops, and it resulted into two famous battles, Battle of Lexington and Battle of Concord. And this resulted into death of many Americans. Okay, but if you see the estimate, okay, so British troops lost 273 soldiers, while the people of the colonies lost 94 only. Now, why? The reason was that, see, ultimately the people of the colonies were also British, and they knew all the British tactics of warfare and everything. So they had a proper knowledge. This was not India. This was again the people, they belong to the same country. So they had a bit idea of the American, of the British techniques and all. As a result, we see that the British lost majority of the soldiers, 273. On the other hand, colonies' losses were only 94. But the Revolutionary War had begun. So that was a mistake of Britain. Colonies were ready to concede it, to negotiate, to find out a solution, a way out. But the British Crown did not listen to them, send the troops, which resulted into battles, and ultimately the war started. After these two battles, once again, the people of the colonies met, and this is the Second Continental Congress. Okay, so this Second Continental Congress, it was organized after Battle of Lexington and Battle of Concord in order to decide how they will handle the entire situation. Okay, so delegates from the colonies, once again, they met at Philadelphia and they started discussing the options. But still, in spite of these two battles of Lexington and Concord, colonies were very clear in their approach that they desire to avoid any further war. Okay, so the desire was to avoid any war. And in July 1775, George Dickinson from Pennsylvania, he drafted Olive Branch Petition. So Olive Branch Petition was a peace petition which was drafted by John, and this petition was sent to Britain. Now, what was this petition? The petition was that, once again, they said that we beseech our loyalty, that we are extremely loyal to the British Crown. We are loyal to the British King, George III. And we request the British Crown, British King, that you please call off the troops who are there, who are stationed in America, that is especially Boston, so that the peace would be restored between the colonies and the Britain. Okay, so up till now, even after these two battles, their approach was very much conciliatory. They wanted to avoid any war, and they wanted that the British rule should continue. But it was Britain's mistake. Once again, George III. Okay, so earlier we saw that jab unhone request kiya, they sent the troops. Now George III, he rejected this Olive Branch Petition. Now, as soon as the Olive Branch Petition was rejected, now it became very much clear for the people of the colonies, war is the only ultimate solution. So George Washington, he was appointed as the commander, as the head of the army, and the army was named as Continental Army. So Continental Army was the army of the colonists, and it was headed by George Washington. Okay, so whatever hopes were there, jo bache kuche jo hopes the, all the hopes were shattered because Battle of Bunker Hill, okay, that was fought. Okay, so according to the Battle of Bunker Hill, British emerged victorious, but now the casualty increased. It was around 1,000 people, British soldiers, who died in the Battle of Bunker. So Battle of Bunker was finally an eye-opener for British Parliament and British Crown that the Revolutionary War has begun. Colonies are at the stage of rebellion. They are not going to listen, and the casualties were increasing day by day. So it was 1,000 casualties, British casualties, in this Battle of Bunker. And now